This is a true crime in real time update from True Crime Today and the Hidden Killers podcast.
It was the fall of 2004 when a 19-year-old college student, a fresh face, eager to carve out her future, found herself at a photo shoot for Da Band. A few months before, she had never imagined she would be in the same room as a hip-hop mogul like Sean Diddy Combs. But there she was, watching as the man who had built an empire in the music industry stood at the center of the room larger than life. He was magnetic, charming, someone people gravitated towards. This was a once-in-a-lifetime moment for her, or so she thought. She didn't know that her life would soon take a terrifying turn that would haunt her forever. According to a lawsuit filed in the Southern District of New York, this young woman, known only as Jane Doe, claims she was swept up in the whirlwind surrounding Combs that day. The lawsuit states that she and a friend were invited to an after-party, a routine occurrence in the world of music entertainment. But before the party, Combs allegedly asked the women to stop by his room at the Manhattan Marriott. Just a quick visit. A seemingly casual request. What happened next, according to the complaint, was anything but routine. The lawsuit details how the women entered Combs' hotel room, where members of his entourage were present. It was here, Jane Doe claims, that the mood shifted. Someone in Combs' circle, she says, suddenly grabbed her and her friend, separating them from the crowd. They were isolated in a room with Combs, where, according to the lawsuit, they were told chilling words. "You know what you are here for." It was the beginning of what would be described in the complaint as a nightmare, a series of events that escalated with each passing minute. Combs, the lawsuit alleges, instructed the women to drink more alcohol and partake in cocaine, which had been laid out on a table. There was no suggestion, no polite offer, just an expectation. And as the night wore on, according to the complaint, Combs' behavior grew more aggressive, more forceful. What started as drinks and conversation allegedly turned into something far more sinister. The lawsuit claims Combs made increasingly brazen advances, eventually ordering Jane Doe's friend to perform a sexual act on him, warning that if she resisted, both women would be killed. Terrified, Jane Doe says she watched helplessly as the night spiraled out of control. Combs, she claims, ignored her pleas to stop and forced her to undress under threats of violence. And then, according to the lawsuit, the unthinkable happened. Combs allegedly raped her. The details are harrowing, too graphic for anyone to imagine. The complaint outlines how Jane Doe was assaulted while pleading for him to stop, but her cries were allegedly met with cold indifference. After the assault, Combs, she says, left the room, but not before issuing one final horrifying instruction. She was to remain in the dark, alone, or face being killed. Time seemed to stand still as Jane Doe, shaken and traumatized, sat there waiting for an uncertain fate. Finally, a security guard arrived, telling her she could leave. She fled as fast as her feet could carry her out of that hotel and into the night. Fast forward 20 years later, and now Jane Doe is one of the first to publicly accuse Combs of sexual assault as part of a wave of lawsuits promised by high-profile Houston attorney Tony Buzbee. But she's not the only one. Buzbee announced in no uncertain terms that he's representing a total of 6 new complainants this week alone. 3 men, 3 women. And the accusations against Combs span nearly 2 decades, painting a picture of power, privilege, and predation. One of those men, known in his lawsuit as John Doe, tells a hauntingly similar story, but from 2021. According to court documents, John Doe says he was invited to a party hosted by Combs in New York City. A big night out, a glitzy event that promised excitement. He was flown in from Georgia, picked up at the airport by Combs' associates, and whisked away to the party. Once inside, he says he was offered ecstasy, an offer he declined. What happened next would forever alter his life. John Doe claims he only drank what he believed to be alcohol, but shortly after, he says, the room began to spin. Confusion set in. Disoriented, he tried to leave, seeking a moment of clarity, a safe space. But according to the lawsuit, before he could escape, he was stopped by a voice, someone who promised to help him. Doe says that was the last thing he remembered before waking up in a bedroom, paralyzed, unable to move, speak, or fight back. The nightmare, he claims, unfolded as he lay there helpless. He distinctly remembers seeing Combs naked, hovering above him as he was assaulted by multiple men. His body frozen, his mind reeling, there was nothing he could do. According to the complaint, this experience left John Doe deeply traumatized, seeking therapy to heal from what he calls a life-altering event. He is suing Combs under the Victims of Gender-Motivated Violence Protection Act, seeking justice for the assault and the devastating aftermath. And yet, even John Doe's allegations are not the last. Another lawsuit filed by a second John Doe recounts a shocking incident at Macy's flagship store in Manhattan. The year was 2008, and the man was working as an advisor for Echo Clothing, a direct rival to Combs' own Sean John clothing line. According to the complaint, the two had crossed paths numerous times in the fashion world, their companies competing in the same high-stakes industry. But one day, in the unlikeliest of places, everything changed. The lawsuit states that John Doe was in the stockroom at Macy's when Combs entered with 3 bodyguards in tow. Before he could react, Doe claims he was struck from behind, collapsing to his knees. What happened next, according to the lawsuit, was an act of brutality. Combs, allegedly referring to the rival clothing line, reportedly said, "Suck my D, Echo," before forcing the man into a violent sexual act. The complaint details how Combs, in the presence of his bodyguards, assaulted the man and then left the stockroom as though nothing had happened. Combs allegedly walked out onto the retail floor and began handing out Sean John merchandise, oblivious to the horror that had just unfolded behind closed doors. Doe claims he tried to report the assault to Macy's security, but his complaints were ignored. Shortly after, he was fired by Echo. These allegations come as part of a much larger pattern of behavior, according to Buzbee, who says he is working with more than 120 individuals, each with their own story of abuse at the hands of Combs. Some of these claims, Buzbee says, date back to the mid-1990s. During a press conference earlier this month, Buzbee didn't mince words when he spoke of the accusations. "When we talk about the ages of the victims when the conduct occurred, it's shocking," he said. "Our youngest victim at the time of the occurrence was 9 years old. We have an individual who was 14 years old. We have one who was 15. But the flood of lawsuits didn't start here. In November of last year, Combs' ex-girlfriend, singer Cassandra Cassie Ventura, filed a bombshell rape and sex trafficking lawsuit against him. Her accusation sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry, and in the months that followed, more accusers stepped forward. What began as whispers in the dark has now become a full-blown legal battle, one that has resulted in Combs' indictment by a grand jury last month. The charges? Racketeering and sex trafficking. In the 14-page indictment, prosecutors outline a criminal enterprise allegedly run by Combs, detailing a pattern of unlawful acts of violence, including sexual violence, as well as narcotics distribution, arson, bribery, and even kidnapping. They say that at the heart of this enterprise was a calculated effort to lure female victims into Combs' orbit, often under the guise of a romantic relationship, before subjecting them to sexual violence. According to the indictment, these elaborate and produced sex performances, which Combs allegedly called freak-offs, involved commercial sex workers and sometimes lasted for days. The grand jury indictment also alleges that Combs distributed drugs to keep his victims obedient and compliant, ensuring they were too impaired to resist or seek help. It's a chilling depiction of a man who, for decades, held immense power in the world of hip-hop and whose actions allegedly left a trail of victims in his wake. Combs has vehemently denied the charges. His legal team has stated that he intends to fight the allegations in court, where he has pleaded not guilty to all charges. He was arrested in Manhattan on September 16th, but has since been denied bail. His trial date is set for May, where he will face the long list of criminal charges against him. And in the meantime, the lawsuits continue to pour in. In addition to Combs, other parties are now being pulled into the legal fray. In Jane Doe's lawsuit, both Bad Boy and Marriott have been named as corporate defendants, accused of enabling the abuse by turning a blind eye. Buzbee has said that other corporate entities, including Macy's, will soon be named in further complaints. The goal Buzbee insists, is not just to hold Combs accountable, but to ensure that justice is served for those who allegedly enabled or ignored the signs of abuse over the years. The scope of these accusations is massive, implicating not only Combs, but also the culture that surrounded him. For decades, he moved through the highest circles of fame, wealth, and influence with a seeming untouchability. Yet, the stories emerging from these lawsuits paint a starkly different picture, one of an alleged predator who operated in the shadows, using his power to exploit, control, and abuse. As Buzbee points out, the evidence is mounting, and the stories share eerie similarities. From Jane Doe's terrifying night in 2004 to the more recent allegations in 2021, the patterns of behavior suggest a repeated use of intimidation, threats, and ultimately, violence. When we see these cases lined up side by side, it becomes clear that this wasn't an isolated incident. Buzbee remarked in a statement, "This is a pattern, and it needs to be addressed in the strongest possible terms." Yet, despite the gravity of these claims, Sean Combs maintains his innocence. His defense team has stated that the allegations are unfounded and that Combs looks forward to his day in court. But for the alleged victims, this legal battle represents more than just one man's guilt or innocence. For them, it's about finally being heard after years of silence, about confronting a culture that, for so long, overlooked the alleged misconduct of those in power. One cannot ignore the context surrounding these cases, the broader movement over the past few years to hold powerful men accountable for their alleged misdeeds. From the Me Too movement to high-profile cases like Harvey Weinstein and R. Kelly, the music industry and Hollywood have faced a reckoning. And now it seems Combs is the latest to be thrust into the spotlight. But as the lawsuits pile up and the accusations grow more severe, the question remains, how did this stay hidden for so long? Many of the alleged victims describe a climate of fear. Jane Doe, in her lawsuit, speaks of the threats made against her if she didn't comply, with death being the ultimate consequence. Others echo similar fears, intimidation tactics, violence, and the looming power of a man with endless resources. For those who lived through these alleged encounters, it wasn't just about what happened in the moment. It was the silence afterward, the terror of speaking out against someone so influential. One of the John Does recounted how he tried to report the alleged assault to Macy's security after the incident in 2008. According to him, his pleas for help went unanswered, and instead of being believed, he was fired. That kind of dismissal isn't just an isolated event, it's part of a larger system that, critics say, protects those at the top while dismissing the voices of the vulnerable. Combs' legal team has countered these claims with aggressive denials, emphasizing that these are allegations, not proven facts. They argue that the plaintiffs are attempting to capitalize on Combs' fame, and the lawsuits are part of a broader attempt to discredit him. Sean has always been a target, one of his legal representatives said, but that doesn't mean these claims are true. We will fight this in court. Indeed, the courtroom battles are just beginning. Combs' legal troubles are piling up, and with more lawsuits expected in the coming weeks, his defense will need to mount a significant effort to combat the growing list of allegations. Yet, regardless of the eventual outcomes of these cases, the sheer volume of accusations is staggering. And for many, the legal process represents a chance to pull back the curtain on years of alleged abuse to expose a pattern that has been, until now, buried beneath layers of celebrity and power. Buzbee has vowed to keep pushing forward. With 120 individuals allegedly coming forward with stories, he insists this is just the beginning. He has promised more lawsuits, more revelations, and more efforts to hold those responsible accountable. Not just Combs, but the systems that allegedly allowed this to continue for years. This isn't just about one man, Buzbee said at a press conference. This is about an entire industry that protected him, that ignored what was happening. As the legal filings continue, the public watches with a mix of shock and anticipation. How will this story unfold? Will justice be served? For the alleged victims, this moment represents a sliver of hope, a chance to reclaim their stories, to confront the man who, they claim, caused them so much pain. But the road ahead is uncertain, and the battle far from over. As the lawsuits march on, one thing remains clear: the world will be watching. Not just to see what happens to Sean Combs, but to understand how an industry built on fame, money, and power could allow so many to suffer in silence. And while Combs fights to clear his name, the stories of those who claim they were wronged by him continue to surface, each more disturbing than the last. The cases against Sean Combs may not be resolved for months or even years, but with every new lawsuit, the weight of the allegations grows heavier, and the picture of a man once celebrated for his achievements becomes more and more complex. Whether found guilty or not, Combs now stands at the center of a firestorm, one that will not easily fade from the public eye. For now, we wait. We wait for the courts to decide. We wait for the stories to be told. We wait to see what happens when the truth, whatever it may be, finally comes to light.
In a world where the darkest secrets lie just beneath the surface.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence says otherwise.
Where hidden killers roam, unnoticed, in the shadows.
I think you would definitely be looking at a blend of toxic, very bad narcissistic personality traits, and they will be vengeful and possibly resort to violence.
Join Tony Buzbee as he uncovers the truth behind the most chilling cases.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence clearly says otherwise.
Each episode, we dig deep into the minds of those who commit the unthinkable.
To your point on narcissism, he thinks in his own mind how witty he is.
Yeah.
But he lost that jury. I was done with him in 2 minutes.
From unsolved mysteries to infamous crimes.
Geez, you've just talked about how you've taught yourself how to do everything under the sun. I bet you did a YouTube video, how to best kill somebody with a knife.
Hidden Killers with Tony Buzbee takes you where few dare to go.
How does someone with such a dark secret go unnoticed for so long?
With multiple new episodes every single day.
We're not just telling stories, we're seeking justice.
Listen now on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Hidden Killers with Tony Buzbee.